Hey folks, it's Spitz from Digital Pharma East in Philadelphia, 2012. It's my pleasure to have Marc Monseau, formerly of J&J PR, now MDM Consultants. And that brings up a topic I just wanted to share with you right away, which is really the evolution, Marc, of public relations within pharma and how it's changed and morphed with the ascendancy of social media. Now that everyone is talking to each other, you've got all the different segments engaging on all these different platforms. How has PR changed, and ultimately how does that dovetail into what pharma especially considers more conventional messaging? And lastly, it all kind of amalgamating together within digital.
Boy, that's a lot to cover, Spitz, and I'll try to cover as much as I can in that. But you raised some really great points. I do come out of that PR background, and now through MDM Communications, I'm trying to provide more of a kind of a holistic approach. And that's one of the things I think the healthcare industry has really lacked. Unfortunately, we still live in organizations that are very, very structured, very siloed in terms of splitting marketing from PR, from customer service. And one of the things that I found in terms of my travels is that you start to notice that within the consumer segment, if you look outside of the pharma industry, if you look at auto manufacturers, if you look at traditional consumer manufacturers, you start to see a breaking down of those silos so that there is much more synergies that are being created between the traditional PR function and the traditional marketing function. Because at the end of the day, basically we're all in control of the different consumer touch points. So you have your customer service center, you've got your public relations center, which is touching traditional media, putting out releases that are being distributed more broadly, and then marketing and advertising, which is sort of touching people in different ways. There needs to be behavioral responses that are consistent throughout all of those organizations. There need to be behaviors overall that need to be consistent to demonstrate kind of that's what your brand is about, that's what your business is about. And when you don't have that, that's when you start to see some breakdown. If you have public relations behaving in one way, where they're very open and engaging, and yet you see marketing being very sort of stiff and very formal, that's a breakdown, and that ends up sort of impacting your brand image and reputation in a detrimental way.
Absolutely, and when we flip that point of view around, now pharma, messaging, and communications are looking toward this kind of integration. They clearly have to look at communications partners to help solve some of these needs and bring some of the benefits. So how do you see that evolution in terms of the partnerships, in terms of full service agencies being distinct from PR firms, in terms of digital providers, and then the niche that you very well fulfill in terms of that consultancy that could kind of oversee the big picture and provide guidance to pharma in a way that gets the results ultimately that they're looking for.
We're already starting to sort of see that in some agencies that are trying to morph and kind of cross those lines, and we can name a few probably between the two of us of organizations that are trying to do that. In terms of what I'm trying to bring to my clients is that sense that it isn't just marketing, it isn't just PR, it's really kind of blending those things together. But ultimately those decisions need to be made at a structural level within the organization themselves. And that takes support from the C-suite, or at least from the very senior leadership within that division. And until you have that level of support from leadership, you're still going to have that friction between those departments, and you're going to have that conflict that occurs. What you really need is to do what you can to sort of educate and obtain leadership support to help drive that through the organization. And that's one of the things that I know a lot of different agencies are trying to do in terms of invigorating and educating leadership within the organization to understand those structural changes, those connection points that need to be made through the different organizations. And I know that's something that organizations like myself can do as well.
And how do you engender that kind of education, that kind of infrastructure transformation from the inside out? Clearly, they need to look at messaging in a whole new kind of way, in an interactive and dynamic way. So I'm assuming it's a mixture of really knowing more and learning more about the channels that are available to them and the technologies.
It's about channels, it's about technologies, but it's also about understanding the sociological changes that are being driven by this technological revolution that's occurring, that's basically creating an entire generation, and in many different ways, an entire group of people now who understand that they in themselves hold the reins in the relationship with companies, and it's trying to try to create an understanding within leadership as well as with others within the organization that change has taken place, and that organizations themselves, to remain relevant, need to make that change as well.
So it sounds to me like you provide a unique mixture of high-level strategy on the one hand, but also almost like a sociological nurturing of the infrastructure itself.
I try to, and that's one of the things I try to bring when I'm working with different clients, is try to look at it from, starting to understand the marketplace, to conduct deep research, but then also to be able to provide that experience and understanding and interpretation of that data for education and training.
How was it like to make that flip from being on the client side ultimately, where you were engaging with partners and communications assistants, to being that assistant, being that partner?
Well, that was a very hard switch to make. My career basically followed a very unusual trajectory in some respects. I came out of journalism, then came into Johnson & Johnson, and I was there for 14 years, always on the client side. But in that 14 years, in many respects, I provided support services for the different J&J brands, both from the pharma side to the med device side to the consumer product side. At first in terms of messaging, issues management, crisis communications, and just general public relations support, but then eventually morphing into providing support for digital communications and services. And so although I'd always been on the client side, I've always had that kind of experience of providing service and support. But that said, it was a very big change to suddenly move from the comfy confines of a large organization into one in which you're basically doing things on your own and making your own mistakes.
Yeah, what's interesting, the industry kind of paralleled your path in a sense, where it's more interfacing to more outwardly facing, embracing new ideas that are outside even the healthcare vertical in terms of the technology, but also the messaging, also the different types of engagement that's available. How do you compare the then and the now, and where do you think all this is ultimately streaming in terms of bringing these things together and bridging some of the gaps that we've been talking about?
Well, I think that ultimately the healthcare industry does have to start to look outside of its own limits and start to look at other models that exist, because quite frankly, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the consumer, and by consumer in this case we're talking about the general patient as well as the healthcare professional, that's the world that they understand, that's the world they expect, and there's going to be increasingly a lack of forgiveness with organizations that don't behave in a similar way to the way in which people experience when they're dealing with consumer products companies, with auto manufacturers, with whoever. And so with that in mind, the healthcare industry itself needs to start to look to those models and figure out ways to bring it in a safe and responsible fashion to be able to adhere to all the regulatory and legal limitations they work under.
Terrific. Folks, Spitz from Digital Pharma East 2012 with Marc Monseau of MDM, talking about the evolution and changes within healthcare and finally catching up to everybody else in this space.
Great to see you, Spitz, and thank you very much for the opportunity.